Thank you very much. I'm going to call to order a meeting of the CERS Board of Trustees. We are having a training session today. We won't be making any policy decisions at all. At this point, Mr. Bronco, would you read our opening statement, please, sir?
Of course. This is a special meeting of the County Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees. This meeting is being broadcast via video teleconference pursuant to KRS 61826 and may be viewed by the public at the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority offices at 1260 Louisville Road, Frankfort, Kentucky. It is also being broadcast to the public via Facebook. If you are speaking and are not appearing by video, please identify yourself before talking. In the event the video or audio is interrupted, we will attempt to reestablish a connection. If a connection cannot be reestablished within 30 minutes, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled.
Thank you. Ms. Rankin, would you call roll, please?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Pendergrass,
Here.
Dr. Carver,
Here.
Mr. Cheatham,
Here.
Mr. Foster, Mr. Fulkerson, Dr. Hackbart,
Here.
Dr. Milkman,
Hello?
Dr. Milkman,
No, this is Mike Foster.
Mr. Foster. Okay, I will mark you present. We're doing roll call, Mr. Foster.
I'm here too, Sherry.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Milkman, Mr. O'Mara,
Here.
and Mr. Powell.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rankin. And our training today is about open meetings and open records, and I will turn the rest of the meeting over to Mr. Bronco.
Okay. So, I'm going to be talking to you all about the Open Meetings Act and the Open Records Act. I might try to go through some slides quickly because when I showed my wife how many slides there were, she said, "I think you made too many." People are going to get upset that that's too long, but it will cover a lot, and I'll try and get through it as concisely as I can without rambling on. So, I can. The Open Meetings Act. So this was established in 1974, and it has a policy provision at the beginning of the act, which is for the business of the public not to be conducted in secret. And the way that you should look at that is if you have questions about whether something is a violation of the Open Meetings Act or should be open, you should always have this public policy portion at 61-800 in the back of your mind, because that is the intent of the General Assembly in enacting this law. The other part of the policy is that exceptions in the act are to be strictly construed, meaning that if there's an exception to an open meeting, like the ability to enter into closed session, that if that's scrutinized, then it's to be blunt, just going to be scrutinized very closely. It's not going to tilt in favor of letting public business be closed. So what are the basic requirements of the act? So the main portion of the act is at 61-810. It says all meetings of a quorum of the members of any public agency at which any public business is discussed or at which any action is taken by the agency shall be public meetings open to the public at all times. I've put in bold terms in that statement that appear a lot of times in open meetings decisions or in the honestly relatively limited amount of case law on the Open Meetings Act. A lot of these terms are defined in another part of the act, but some of them are not defined by the act itself and are in Attorney General opinions. So one of these is a meeting. So the act defines a meeting as all gatherings of every kind, including video teleconferences, regardless of where the meeting is held and whether regular or special and informational or casual gatherings held in anticipation of or in conjunction with a regular or special meeting. So that mouthful essentially means any meeting, any gathering is going to be considered a meeting. The Attorney General's opinions on this, I struggled to find anything that they didn't consider a meeting. So I don't think that that's something that, as a part of the act, is really going to be something that most of the board is ever not going to meet. I think most times that the board is together, it's going to be a meeting. And I've incorporated that into the statement on the previous slide below, which essentially takes the place of the word meeting in the open meeting statute. The next part of the act is public agencies. So what is a public agency? The act defines it as several things. It's every state or local government board, commission, or authority, every state or local legislative board, commission, or authority, every state or local government agency created by or pursuant to a state or local statute, executive order, ordinance, resolution, or legislative act. Any body created by or pursuant to state or local statute, order, ordinance, resolution, or other legislative act in the legislative or executive branch of government. But I think what is most important in the context of this training are kind of the last definitions. Any entity when the majority of its governing body is appointed by a public agency, a member or employee of a public agency, a state or local officer, or any combination thereof. And so you have another definition of any board, commission, committee, subcommittee, ad hoc committee, advisory committee, council, or agency, except for a committee formed for the purpose of evaluating the qualifications of public agency employees, established, created, and controlled by a public agency. And then you also have an interagency body, two or more public agencies where each is a public agency. The definition of public agency for open meetings is a little different than open records. Open records is a little bit more expansive, but I think what we will focus on next is boards, commissions, committees, subcommittees, ad hoc committees, etc. So yes, Merle?
General question, are there any circumstances or any types of gatherings which are exempt from open meetings? For example, if it was strictly maybe a training session, for example, it doesn't seem that's really any official action be taken. Are there any exemptions of that nature that seem quite comprehensive? I was just curious whether there are any exemptions that have been accorded.
Yeah, so let me go back a couple slides. So if you look at the top with all the bolded words and phrases in it, all of that needs to be present for there to trigger the Open Meetings Act. So you need a meeting, you need a quorum of the members of a public agency where public business is discussed or action is taken. So if you're missing one of these elements, it doesn't trigger the Open Meetings Act. And I've got some more slides that explain that a little bit better later in the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Eric,
Yes?
that same paragraph, I understand what you're saying, but I noticed there was an or.
Yes.
That's statement.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it doesn't take a discussion and, you know,
no, it doesn't. It's either or.
it's either or.
Yes.
That's the thing that needs to be pointed out.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's either or. If you discuss business or action is taken and you meet the other criteria for triggering this clause, then you've got to comply with the Open Meetings Act. Okay. So what I'll get into now is these kind of subcommittee language, subcommittee, ad hoc, advisory councils, etc. These are public agencies, which since we've gone back and forth with that, I'm just going to call it the main definition. A public agency needs to be involved to trigger the Open Meetings Act. These boards, subcommittees, ad hoc committees, if they are established, created, and controlled by a public agency, they themselves are public agencies. So, for example, if CERS created a committee and then controlled it through policy, that is also subject to open meetings. So control's not defined in the statute. The Attorney General hasn't given a very explicit definition of it, but they have some opinions on it. One of them is if the agency creates a committee or subcommittee and defines the duty of it through policy, usually through bylaws, then that sub-entity is a public agency. Also, if an agency defines the composition of the sub-entity or sets the time it meets, how its members are selected, that's also suggests that it's controlled by the parent agency and is itself a public agency. So to kind of go back real quick, you see that public agency is one of the elements that's needed to trigger the Open Meetings Act. A secondary definition of public agency is an entity with a majority of its governing body appointed by the agency, or that's appointed by a member or employee of the agency, or a state or local officer, or any combination of that. This really is covering entities that aren't created by the agency, but have a majority of their members appointed by the agency or agency employees. Where the Attorney General has really discussed this a lot has been in the context of universities, bodies created by faculty groups within a college, within a university, depending on their composition and how these people are appointed. The Attorney General has variously held that they are or are not public agencies themselves. This can cover work groups and other similar bodies. It's similar to the previous definition where the more control or authority the parent agency exerts or delegates to the entity, the more likely it is going to be a public agency. Also, the more formality it observes. So if it acts like a board or it has judicial functions, it's more likely to be a public agency. But there's limitations to that. So the Attorney General has basically recognized that if you take these definitions literally, you could go all the way from the top down in an agency to where every single administrative meeting is considered a public agency and potentially subject to open meetings. And so they've recognized the intent of open meetings is to provide public access to meetings of decision-making bodies, not day-to-day administrative work. So what they've really done, because there's no bright line rule, is they've said, if the work being done by the entity is too remote from the decision-making process, the Open Meetings Act is not going to be triggered. The more decision-making responsibility that an entity has, the more likely it will be considered a public agency. But something that has a purely administrative function is likely not a public agency. And so another definition in the main statute, who are members of a public agency. A member of a public agency is a member of the governing body of the public agency. It's not employees or licensees of the agency. So another term, public business. That's something that the statute doesn't define. But there's a Kentucky Supreme Court case, Yeoman, which defined public business as the discussion of the various alternatives to a given issue about which the board has had the option to take action. And the Attorney General again has an opinion that the expenditure of public funds, discussion of the scope or type of services offered by a public agency, discussion about the regulations, policies, and procedures that affect the manner in which the agency provides services to the public or complies with statutory duties, and personnel matters affecting the compensation, benefits, or duties of public employees would all probably be public business. But the Supreme Court in Yeoman also said public business is not simply any discussion between two agency officials. And that is also reflected in the statute as well. There's a part of the statute that says informational meetings are okay. So what does it mean to take action on public business? Action taken means a collective decision, commitment, or promise to make a positive or negative decision or an actual vote by the majority of the members of the governmental body. That's in the Open Meetings Act. That's defined by the statute. Taking action can be an expression that you're not going to do anything on an issue. As I'll discuss a little later, all actions taken have to be recorded in meeting minutes if the meeting is an open meeting. So Open Meetings Act can be triggered by both discussion of business or taking action. You don't need both. Either one is sufficient if all the other elements are present to trigger the Open Meetings Act. So another part is the quorum. So what constitutes a quorum? That really depends on the public agency and how it defines a quorum, or if a statute defines what a quorum is. For CERS, for a regular Board of Trustees meetings, the statute defines it as a majority of the trustees. So quorums for a lot of the CERS committees are in the bylaws. Another thing that you all should keep in mind, the attendance of a quorum of the full board at a committee meeting does not automatically trigger the Open Meetings Act. It can trigger the Open Meetings Act if board members are going to a committee meeting as a way to avoid calling a special meeting of the full board. So essentially, putting it in context with CERS, the board could not decide to use a regularly scheduled investment committee meeting to just show up there and start discussing business that's the purview of the full CERS board. But showing up to watch something is, the Attorney General has been fairly clear that that is not going to trigger a quorum of the parent board. Another portion of the Open Meetings Act points out that it's prohibited to use a series of less than quorum meetings to avoid the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. That would be exactly what it sounds like, pretty much meeting in small groups and formulating public business or making decisions and then coming together and ratifying it. But it's also clear that you can have individual discussions when the purpose is to educate members on specific issues. So, yes, Lyle?
Going back up just a little bit with regard to members that choose to attend a committee meeting that they are not on.
Yeah.
Because I think that question is essentially on the table. Am I correct in interpreting what you're telling me? Showing up is one thing, participating is another.
There is an attorney general's opinion. It is pre-COVID. It says something along the lines of you can show up and you can even participate, because as long as it's not being used as a subterfuge to evade the requirements of the act. And so as long as it is not a hijacking of the committee meeting to then discuss the parent board's business, I think it is fine. But I will caveat it by the attorney general, the comparison they made, and this was pre-COVID again, was we're okay with this because the same thing would happen if they just watched it on television. So the only reason I'm a little cautious with the participation aspect is now we have Zoom and we have the ability to talk and interact in committee meetings while not being physically present. And so that's not a settled part of the law. But as far as showing up and watching, the attorney general is clear that that's fine. The participation, it seems like they're fine with that as well, but it's just, I would keep in mind that that was pre-COVID, pre everybody using Zoom and being able to easily interact through a computer with the meeting. Does that make sense?
It does, and that's where I guess the gray area is, because, you know, the general public can obviously tune in and listen, but they can't participate.
Mm-hmm.
As a non-committee member trustee may choose to log in through Facebook where they can't participate, or, you know, log in through a Zoom link, which would allow them that ability. Is that something that is worth entertaining, requesting an attorney general's opinion on?
I'm not sure. It depends on the attitude of the board. I'll add this. So the public has a right to be at meetings. The public does not have a right to participate in meetings. And I don't have the attorney general's opinion in front of me. Both of these, if you look at the slide, the 12 OMD and the 19 OMD, those are the two opinions that talk about members of the whole going to committee meetings and there being a quorum of the whole board technically, and the attorney general not, the attorney general says that doesn't trigger open meetings. I would have to look at the language of those again to see what else is in there, because I have a feeling one of them talks about the attorney general is not as concerned about boards going to other committee meetings. They have one of these opinions says something along the lines of why would we care about that if they're going to the committee meetings, as long as it's not being used to essentially call an uncalled meeting of the full board. So I think that's really how they're looking at it. But then again, I'm just trying to caveat it for you all that, these are all pre-Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
I see there's other hands raised, but I can't see who they are.
Dr. Hackbert had a question.
Uh-huh. Go ahead.
So does it really trigger on how much participation there is by those additional, we'll put it in CERS terms, when additional trustees attend a committee meeting, if they're observing rather than participating, or if they're asking a question? If it's clear that they are not voting on an issue, does that do those characteristics have any bearing?
I think it does. So I think sitting and observing, based on those two attorney general opinions, don't create a problem. I think the participation in asking a question likely does not create a problem. Because then again, what I remember from these opinions is that the attorney general's kind of rationale for it was more, we don't want uncalled meetings of the whole board happening at a committee. There's also a line in one of them that says, that talks about, as long as the discussion remains essentially within the purview of the committee, they're happy. So the way to look at it, if there's going to be some sort of participation by non-committee members who are watching committee meetings, is I would think about it as, so long as there is not a transmutation of the business of the committee into suddenly a general board meeting, it is likely fine.
And Bill O'Mara had a question, and Dr. Hackbert, you're on deck.
Actually, Eric just went over my point. Pre-COVID, I have experience where other board members could attend any committee and could participate in asking questions of the committee's business, but did not have a vote. And there didn't seem to be any concern participating under those rules, which I think Eric just went over.
Right. And that's my understanding of the Attorney General's opinions. And I can provide copies of those to everybody as well. Any other questions on this?
So,
Dr. Hackbert, do you still have a question?
yeah, and maybe it's just a detail takeoff of the previous question. So it's our understanding then that other C members can listen in or participate by Zoom. As long as no decisions are made, they can ask questions and interact with the committee members.
I think I take the Attorney General's opinion to be more, you can interact as long as you are not transforming the committee meeting into a general meeting of the board. So as long as you stay on committee business. I also believe that the committee has the right to probably dictate how their meeting's going to go. So I think of it as more, and I'll touch on this later in the slides, a lot of what the enforcement mechanism of the Open Meetings Act is there's a violation of it, and it essentially hinges on the fact that you had a meeting without calling a special meeting or scheduling a regular. So that, I think, is what the Attorney General is really getting at in saying you can go to these committee meetings, but if your presence causes a quorum of the full board, you just cannot end up having a full board meeting at the committee meeting. I hope that makes sense.
Now, when you talk about a full board, so like, for example, the investment committee,
Mhm.
it makes decisions, it basically provides recommendations to the full board. So are the committee members not covered by the Open Records Act?
They are correct. They are covered by it. It's a quorum. It's the quorum of the body that's meeting. So the investment committee
Or
has
the
a
body
different,
that's meeting, okay.
yeah,
okay.
it has a different quorum requirement than the full board. So what I'm talking about is if you have 5 CERS members at an investment committee meeting and so many of them are extra, they're not on the investment committee, you technically have 5, the 9 members of the CERS board there, you technically have a quorum of the CERS board, the full board. But that's what the Attorney General is saying. That's not something they're worried about. As long as it doesn't turn into a full board meeting that's uncalled and unscheduled, they're not too worried about it, essentially.
So the individuals listening in on Zoom are not making it a full committee. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
They're not making it the quorum
board
of the
meeting.
CERS full board. Yeah.
For instance, CERS Investment Committee meets, they are focused on a particular issue. They make a recommendation that will be forwarded to the board. As
Mhm.
long as there's no action at that same meeting that implies that the board has now ratified or approved that recommendation, we don't have a board meeting. We just have a committee meeting, and that committee recommendation still has to go to the full board.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, if in that specific example, if you have the full board, let's say there's 5 people there, if they start discussing it, that's something that's a little bit concerning too. If everybody is now having a discussion and there's a quorum of the full board, that's when it seems a little bit more of, okay, now we're kind of having a full CERS meeting. We're not really having an investment committee meeting. So I guess it can be a bit of a fine line depending on what you discuss, but going there and getting information and asking questions, as long as it stays within the purview of what the committee's business is, and it's not business that the full board needs to decide, it's the Attorney General is not very concerned with it. Any other questions on this point?
I will say that that is generally how the KRS system operated prior to the split. Committee members often, or trustees often attended committees where they were not members. They occasionally asked questions, but they mostly just gathered information and used it as a learning experience. So they'd have more background information when they got to the full board discussion.
Oh, I agree. I think that's fine. I do. The Open Meetings Act is just mainly concerned with if the full board's going to make a decision, there needs to be notice so the public can watch it. So, getting information and not, having a decision by the full board is, that's the Attorney General's not concerned with that. Okay. So, exceptions to open meetings. There's 2 broad exceptions. When you don't meet the main statutory definition for an open meeting. So to go back a little bit, or a lot, if you don't meet one of these bold phrases, then the Open Meetings Act isn't triggered. So for example, quorum of board members can meet socially as long as they do not discuss or take action on public business. If they do, then that's technically an open meeting or a meeting that should be open. You can also have less than a quorum of board members that meet and discuss public business, so long as they aren't holding a series of less than quorum meetings with the intent to subvert the Open Meetings Act. So these situations, when you don't meet the main definition, don't require closed sessions because the Open Meeting Act it doesn't apply. But you should be careful because any challenge to a meeting under the Open Meetings Act is going to be strictly construed in favor of open meetings. So you should also take care that quorums of committees are not present in a lot of situations. Then the other exception to the Open Meetings Act broadly is when a statutory exception applies. So there's 14 exceptions to the open meetings requirement. Not all of them are relevant to CERS. There's things like discussions of the parole board, which is obviously not relevant. Most relevant to CERS are discussion of proposed or pending litigation against or on behalf of the public agency. So courts have held this means matters inherent to litigation and includes preparation, strategy, or tactics. It does not mean you can just have an attorney present in the meeting and go into closed session on litigation. So it's concerned with litigation, not the presence of an attorney. And it anticipates that the closed session is to discuss things such as preparation, strategy, or tactics, things that would obviously cause problems if they were discussed in an open meeting that everybody could watch. Another exception is discussions or hearings which might lead to the appointment, discipline, or dismissal of an individual employee or member. So that's an appropriate use of closed session. There have been attorney general opinions that make it clear that if you're going to invoke that exception, you need to state which part of it, appointment, discipline, or dismissal, you're going into closed session for. They've also made clear that this is not an invitation to just discuss general personnel matters in secret. Discussions which fall into these statutory exceptions are required to be held in closed session. So again, just a reminder, any reviewing agency, the Attorney General, a circuit court, is going to strictly scrutinize why you went into closed session. They're not going to give the agency the benefit of the doubt, like they will if it was an open meeting. So requirement for closed sessions, notice has to be given in regular open meeting. You have to discuss the general nature of the business to be discussed in closed session, why you're going into closed session, and the specific provision of KRS 61.810, which is the closed session exceptions statute that authorizes you to go into closed session. You have to make a motion and you have to carry the motion. No final action can be taken in closed session. This includes going into closed session and then saying that, we're not going to do anything on a certain item. That needs to be stated in open session. And you cannot have a discussion of anything in closed session other than what was publicly announced prior to convening in closed session. I will say this, it is important to announce why you're going into closed session and be accurate about it. because reviewing bodies, the Attorney General and circuit courts have said, you know, that's what everybody uses to gauge whether you went into closed session properly or not. And so that needs to be accurate. Regular and special meetings. So regular meetings are meetings which are held according to a schedule provided by the agency to the public. An agency can provide it by ordinance, order, resolution, bylaw, whatever means may be required for the conduct of business of the agency. So they're less concerned with the form. Regular meetings must be held at specific times and places which are convenient to the public. This means making sure that wherever you're going to have your public meeting has appropriate space, seatings, and acoustics. Special meetings, and I'll say this, there's only regular or special meetings. There's no other class of meetings under the Open Meetings Act. So special meetings are meetings that boards can call at any time, provided that the presiding officer or a majority of the members agree to call the special meeting. The agency provides written notice of the date, time, and place of the special meeting and provides an agenda. Discussion and action are limited to items on the agenda. The notice is personally delivered, mailed, or faxed to every member of the public agency, as well as media organizations who have gone through a process to request notice of special meetings. This is not as big a deal anymore because you can elect to receive it by email, and I would bet that every agency in the state does it by email now. But you still have to put notice in the building where the special meeting's taking place, as well as in the headquarters 24 hours before. A little subset of special meetings are emergency meetings. Emergency meetings can be called only when there's an emergency that would prevent compliance with the notice requirements related to special meetings. The presiding officer or majority of the members must still call the meeting, and the agency must make a reasonable effort under the circumstances of the emergency to notify members of the agency, the meeting, and the media and the public. At the beginning of an emergency meeting, the person chairing the meeting must describe the circumstances of the emergency. And discussion and action is limited to the emergency for which the meeting is called. I've added this slide because I found it interesting what the Attorney General, how they've kind of interpreted this. So they had one opinion that essentially said, we have never approved of anybody's rationale for an emergency meeting before. And so I pulled some other ones to show you just how difficult it is to call an emergency meeting and how strictly the Attorney General is going to interpret it, but also to show that they've also interpreted it as being okay in certain circumstances that aren't really intuitive. So they did not like, after the tornadoes in 2021, that Marshall County Fiscal Court had an emergency meeting without trying to give notice to the public or the media. And they held that as a violation of the Open Meetings Act, even though, as we all remember, that they had a completely devastating tornado in that county.
Do we know what was on that agenda?
No, I think it was a fiscal court meeting that
A
they
regular fiscal court meeting?
Yeah, I think they, after the tornadoes, tried to call an emergency fiscal court meeting. And given that essentially what it was, whatever, I can't remember the town, whatever town I think got the worst of it, tried to do it, or that county. And
Mayfield.
Yeah, the Attorney General said, we're aware of how bad it was over there, but you've still got to at least try to give notice. Bath County, the fiscal court did give a sufficient justification, and this is the only one I could find where the Attorney General approved of it, for an emergency meeting concerning the passage of a budget ordinance. And so Bath County faced a situation where they had to pass something, or basically everything in Bath County would stop. The Attorney General said that was okay, and made it a point to kind of say that's okay, even though we recognize that, it's kind of your fault that this isn't passed, but it is an actual emergency that, if you don't pass this bill, all the vital services in this town will stop, or county. Yes, Merle?
What defines an emergency? Are the statutes sufficiently clear? Because it seems sort of a gray area. It seems there are clearly times when organizations or units or departments or committees need to meet in an emergency defined by that party. Seems the Attorney General's even in a difficult spot here because, what is an emergency?
Yeah, they don't define emergency in the statute. I don't remember the Attorney General in these opinions defining emergency. I think what the Attorney General's office is doing is it is just scrutinizing everything on a case by case basis with emergency meetings. Because I've tried to reconcile why Marshall County, after a tornado that destroys the county, gets hit with an open meetings violation.
So they're,
And Benton County
so they're just
does
primarily
not.
opinion ex post after the meeting takes place because there was an emergency in the eyes of that organization or that committee or.
Yes, I think a lot of it is depending on what kind of justification the body can give the Attorney General if this comes to him or them on a complaint. And the Attorney General trying to decide whether that's an actual emergency or not. I what I kind of get from their opinions are they're giving some weight to time, and whether a meeting is necessary to immediately prevent something horrible from happening or compounding a situation. My recollection is the Marshall County meeting was dealing with the tornado, but was also not specifically for that purpose, where the Bath County meeting they just didn't pass this budget ordinance, and it was days away from just shutting everything down in the county.
So maybe kind of follow up. So suppose such a meeting takes place and then the ex post assessment by the Attorney General determines that it was not properly executed emergency meeting. Would the actions taken place during the meeting be evacuated, eliminated? Or is there any follow-up beyond just an opinion by the Attorney General saying you didn't do this right?
So I have some slides that we're getting very close to that'll answer that question about enforcement actions that'll apply to emergency meetings.
All right, thank you. Interesting.
And
Question. So suppose in our situation that the stock market crashes and we want to discuss or as a whole committee make a recommendation to change our investment strategy. Can that be an emergency meeting?
That's a good question. And that's what seems to be pretty unsettled from the Attorney General's perspective. So you have one opinion that suggests that that would be okay, the Bath County one where they passed the budget ordinance. I would imagine that it could be an emergency meeting, and whether that gets hit with a violation of the Open Meetings Act determines on, did the board actually try and give people notice that this thing was going to happen, that this meeting was going to take place, or did they just have the meeting and dealt with the fallout afterwards? So a lot of it is, again, the whole purpose of the act, don't do public business in secret. I think that if there was a calamity that the board needed to meet immediately to preserve the assets of the trust, it would, I would guess, and that's the best I could do, that the Attorney General would begrudgingly be okay with it so long as there was a serious attempt to give notice to the public of the meeting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Were there any other questions?
Lyle has a question.
Eric, back to page 18 of the board books,
Okay.
just clarification.
Will you tell me, because I don't have the board books, I just got the slides. What's it called?
The slide titled regular versus special
Okay.
meeting. Last line says notice is conspicuously posted.
Uh-huh.
You be a little bit more specific about what has to be in that notice.
So the notice is the date, time, and place of the special meeting and the agenda of the meeting.
That's what I was looking for. Okay.
Uh-huh. All right.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
it looks like that Marshall County got done because they didn't attempt to give notice. Where
Yes.
Bath County may have had less of an emergency, but they
Mhm.
gave notice.
So I just can't remember the notice part of Bath County, but I do remember Marshall County's was that they didn't attempt to give notice. Because, I mean, of course, the Attorney General wrote the opinion in a nice way saying, we acknowledge what happened, but look, you have to at least try. Bath County's seem to be focused more on, this creates an emergency, especially if you don't pass your budget ordinance. I can look at that opinion again and see specifically what notice they gave. But I do think from a combination of these opinions that the notice requirement is what they're really looking for in the context of what the emergency is. So, again, that initial part of the act that public business cannot be conducted in secret is what they're going to be thinking of. Okay. So a couple other examples are, no emergency existed when Pee Wee Valley said there was going to be, that there was civil unrest because they were going to put a cell tower in a certain place of whatever county that is. And also that there was not an emergency when Somerset Community College wanted to discuss changing its name. That also, I can pull that opinion and provide it to people. That also had something to do with the legislature passed a bill, I believe, that required a name change. But the Attorney General really kind of just took it as that's just not, that's not an emergency, changing the name of the college. Video teleconferencing. Anything can be conducted through video teleconference, provided that notice is given the same as a regular or special meeting. It's clearly stated that it'll be by video. The public and media organizations are given specific info on how they may view the meeting electronically. A primary physical location where the public may attend is identified, but only if the agency elects to provide a physical location or two or more members of the agency are attending the video teleconference meeting from the same physical location. You have to treat a video meeting just the same as a physical meeting. Another caveat is that everybody has to remain on camera all time business is being discussed, and that the agency has a duty to suspend the meeting if there's an interruption in the video or audio of the broadcast. So, that makes sense in the context of the act. If you're doing it by video, the video drops out or the audio drops out, the public can't see it. You can't just continue to talk about public business in that case. Public attendance. Agencies can't prevent the public from attending meetings. They can put conditions on attendance that are required to maintain orders. So, I mean, it's a little silly, but shirts, shoes, no yelling, no disrupting the meeting. That's appropriate. Agencies can't require members of the public to identify themselves as a condition of attendance. Agencies have to provide meeting room conditions, including adequate space, seating, and acoustics, which allow effective public observation of the meeting. The Attorney General is clear. This doesn't mean that the agency has to pick the most convenient location and the most convenient times for the public. It just can't be secret. It can't be, you're having your meeting on top of Mount Everest where the public can't get to it. You just have to have it in a reasonable place where the public can hear what's going on, see what's going on, so that they can understand the public business that's being discussed. Agencies have to allow the media. They have to allow the media to record and broadcast meetings.
Now, if someone wants to speak at a public meeting that is not a member of the board, and you require them to say who they are?
Yeah. So the aspect forbidding conditioning them to identify themselves is just in relation to attendance. The public has no right to speak at meetings. And when I say that, I mean there's no entitlement to that. So that is something that's done through the agency's kind of, I hate to say it this way, but grace that agencies usually want to hear from members of the public that they serve. And so they will allow public comments, but it's a privilege, not a right.
Thank you.
Minutes have to be taken at all meetings. Minutes have to be accurate. They have to record votes and they have to record actions. There's a time limit for when minutes have to be completed for public inspection. Calling a meeting to order, adjourning a meeting, those are actions. You have to record those. You do not need to take minutes in closed session.
Do you have to take minutes in this meeting?
Yes.
All the things that you're saying have to be recorded?
No, because there's not action being taken and we're not taking any votes. So the minutes for this meeting and as somebody who's not an expert, and I hate to say it, but are probably going to be calling the meeting to order and adjourning mostly. Enforcement of the Open Meetings Act. It's either an administrative process, a judicial process, or a combination of both. Administrative is it begins when a person submits a complaint to the presiding officer of the agency detailing the circumstances of a suspected violation and that person's proposed remedy for the violation. The agency has 3 days after receiving the complaint, excluding weekends and legal holidays, to decide whether to accept the remedy the person has suggested and write a response to the person making the complaint. You have to write a response whether you agree or not. If the agency does not decide to adopt that person's remedy, it must inform that person of the specific statutes which support its denial and a brief explanation of how those statutes apply. So normally, you know, if you had, let's say, an emergency meeting, and that person complains, well, it wasn't really an emergency. The board would have a duty to reply to that person and say, well, actually, here's the emergency meeting statute. Here's the circumstances why we think it was appropriate to call an emergency meeting, and send that in writing to that person. Response must be issued by the presiding officer or under their authority, and that constitutes final agency action. That's important for the Open Records Act. If the person doesn't like the agency's decision, once they get it, they have 60 days to take it to the Attorney General. Once they take it to the Attorney General has 10 days to issue a written response. So in the process of writing a response, the Attorney General can ask for additional documentation from the agency to support its position or whatever it needs. Once the Attorney General makes its decision, anybody who doesn't like that decision has 30 days to appeal it. If nobody appeals it, the Attorney General's opinion becomes law. It can be enforced in the circuit court of the county in which the agency has its principal place of business or where the meeting violation occurred. The Attorney General does not have the power to void agency actions which it finds to have violated the Open Meetings Act. It's issuing opinions. It's not voiding agency action. Judicial enforcement is the other prong. A party can file suit in circuit court where the agency has its principal place of business or where the alleged violation occurred. That person doesn't have to exhaust their administrative remedies before filing suit. All they have to do is file the initial complaint with the agency prior to filing the lawsuit. Open Meetings Act's complaints in circuit court have to be given scheduling preference over everything else, and they have to be assigned for trial as soon as possible. Any rule, resolution, regulation, ordinance, or other formal action of a public agency without substantial compliance of the related to the Open Meetings Act, closed session, notice, special meetings, can be voided by the court. That language in the act, it's not mandatory that if the court finds a violation, that it undo the action of the body. It's voidable. So the court has the option to void it, but it does not have to. Anyone who prevails in an Open Meetings Act challenge against an agency where the violation is found to be willful can be awarded costs, which are usually your filing fee, depositions, and attorney's fees. They can also be awarded up to $100 per violation. And this is all paid by the agency. And there's no statute of limitations for Open Meetings Act violations. I'm
We
gonna
actually have an example of all this currently unfolding here in Nelson County. One of our local boards had conversations on Facebook and conversations among 4 of the 5 board members about decisions they were going to take in the next meeting without meeting, well, I won't go that far. Anyway, opponents of their actions have filed a complaint in circuit court and asked for some injunctions on activities they were gonna do.
Right. Yeah. So all that's required to go to court is filing a complaint with the agency. There is a court decision that says if you don't file this initial complaint with the presiding officer of the agency, that the court doesn't have jurisdiction to entertain anything else. But you don't have to go to the attorney general. You don't have to wait for his decision. You can go to circuit court when you feel like you need to go to circuit court, as long as you've done that. I'll point out that it's been a little over an hour and we're at open records, which is probably about the same length as as the Open Meetings Act portion. I don't know if you all want to go on or hold that for another day. I'm fine going on. I don't want to take up everybody's time.
Let's go forward because I had planned on this being a 2-hour session.
Okay, sounds good. So open records, it's passed in 1976. The policy of it is that free and open file.
Yeah, just before we jump into open records, just a quick question. You may not know the answer to this. Rebecca, I see you out there. You might be able to answer it. What is, with regard to the press, whoever, notifying to be on the list of being notified of meetings, and is there a particular process for that that's in place, or we just leave it up to them to notify us, Rebecca? And I guess my follow-up question to that is there a mechanism in place for the general public to be able to register and be notified of meetings?
I don't know the answer to the general public. Sherry has a very specific process that she follows as far as notifications. We put the written notices go in our lobbies, and we send to a list. Sherry, do you want to read the list of folks that get it, or is it too long a list for that?
I don't need to just, I know when I was in office, one of the things that we did is we sent out a notice to the various publications in the area, once a year to say, all right, you want on the list, you didn't want on the list. I didn't know whether we had something similar to that or not.
I'll say it's in the special meetings part of the Open Meetings Act statute. I've gone back to that slide. This is what I've written here is like a little bit truncated from what the actual statute says, because it's a lot more about members of the media and news gathering organizations. They have some sort of duty yearly to contact the agency and request to receive notice of special meetings. And they also, if they want them by email, need to go through some other step to do that. So I think with media members, at least with special meetings, they have some duty to interact with the agency and be put on a list. And my thought is that the statute's written that way so that you don't have a list of publications that want notice of a particular special meeting that they're interested in, just clogging up the rolls and creating an administrative headache when, they might not care what, special meetings called, 3 years from now for the agency.
Sure, Mr. Bronco, if I could, the process that we use here is that when I do actually post the notice and the agenda here on our campus in the lobbies, when we send it to the website for posting on our website, communications holds our list of media and those who are receiving the notification by email, and our communication department handles that.
We can take that as an action item, Mr. Cheatham,
Yes,
and get a little bit more
absolutely.
information on that if you wish.
So I'm just curious as to what it is, and even more curious as with regard to just even proactively being able to notify the general public, or at least members anyway.
We'll look into it.
Sorry, Eric, didn't mean to disrupt you, but I didn't want you to get into a whole different subject.
Yeah, my brain would have switched over.
Dr. Hackford also has a question.
Okay.
Thank you. I was just curious if you could talk a little bit more about, okay, we have an open session meeting, and periodically we've gone into closed session. My understanding is that closed session basically are sort of two justifications. One is dealing with personnel, which I'm not exactly how broad that can be. And number two, dealing with legal actions. Could you talk a little bit more about, the degree to which we have some flexibility in determining whether or not a particular item is justifies a closed session and so forth?
So let's see. I've only pulled 2 here. I have to admit, I do not know by heart the other 12 exceptions, but for litigation, for example, you have to talk about litigation and you have to talk about some aspect of it. So either your preparation strategy, tactics, what happened in a hearing and what is the agency's response to that hearing. That's appropriate. But what they've cut out of it is just going into closed session and having general discussions with the board's attorney. That's not a closed session matter. It's got to be related to litigation. Personnel matters. The 3 acceptable things to discuss in closed session for personnel are appointment, discipline, or dismissal of an employee or a member of the agency. And what the courts have said is, or Attorney General probably more likely, is that excludes just going into closed session to discuss general personnel matters. And so those are the 2 statutory exceptions that really would apply to this board. A lot of them are otherwise either going to be used so rarely. One of them is meetings that the Constitution requires be held in secret. I don't know what this agency would be doing that would meet that requirement. And other ones are clearly specific to other types of agency, like meeting of the parole board.
Sherry, I've got what we call the blue sheet that the chairs use for describing our motions to go into closed session. If you could let me share the screen for a second, then I can put that list up.
Do I have to give up my screen?
I'm not sure which one of you.
You will probably have to unshare your screen in
That's
order to
fine.
give her a chance to share hers.
Eric, while they're working on that, one of the exemptions is with regard to, you know, if it would affect the price, you know, and what I used to deal with obviously were issues of either acquiring or disposing of property.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I've got this list up that I keep in my book for describing our closed sessions. Real property is the first one.
Yeah. My question to you is, I don't know that it has occurred, but I could certainly see where it could occur, given the dollar amounts that we deal with,
mhm.
from the standpoint of making investments into particular either securities or otherwise that could affect the price.
So
Any thoughts on that?
I've thought about that, and there's not a clear answer to it. So there's another exception, um, which is essentially it's worded something like discussions between a public agency and a representative of a business concerning a proposal, and I believe it also mentions if open discussions would jeopardize the sitting, retention, expansion, so on of that business. When I was putting this together, I've seen that one, and I've always been a little curious about it. And the Attorney General's kind of strict with it. So what they are really talking about with that exception is that you're talking about a physical business coming to the county, and for whatever reason, if you have an open discussion about it, you know, it might not be able to come there, or you know, they're not going to be able to upgrade it. The real property one, I think if the board were buying an actual piece of real property, um, that could apply. I do not think it applies to investments, uh, like real estate trust type.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I guess the reason why I'm asking that question is when you get into that issue, you get an interplay, not just the issue of open records, open meetings,
Mhm.
but also federal law with regard to SEC, FINRA, whoever.
Right. So there's an exception in there that if something has to be confidential by some either the Constitution, and I think there's an exception for if there's another statute that says it needs to be confidential. That can be used for closed meetings or closed session. But using the real property exception for anything but kind of its literal purpose, which by its plain language really is talking about you're talking about buying a physical piece of land, and you don't need to have an open meetings discussion about price where somebody's gonna undercut you, or you know, you have a meeting where you say we have X amount of dollars to buy this piece of property, and if you have an open meeting, you know, that the seller is going to see it, adjust the price accordingly. That's what it's trying to avoid. But more intangible stuff, because these exceptions are strictly construed, is not going to be it's not going to be appropriate, most likely.
I guess where I was heading with this general question was with, for example, if you have alternate bids for some process, for example, managers or something of that nature, seems to me then you do have the federal statutes which have some implications and so forth. So,
right.
I mean,
so if you have a federal or state statute, or if the Constitution says you have the ability or you must do this in secret, there are exceptions in the Open Meetings Act for that. But absent those, you have to find another exception to use to go into closed session.
and that would probably to some extent in committee meetings and so forth, where we have questions of that nature.
Right. It would.
Okay, I'll give the screen back to you guys.
All righty. Let's see.
$40.
All right. So I'm going to move to open records. So the policy of open records. Free and open examination of public records is in the public interest, and the exceptions provided by the act or otherwise provided by law shall be strictly construed, even though such examination may cause inconvenience or embarrassment to public officials or others. So that is number one to keep in mind when you think about the Open Records Act. That's what the General Assembly wants, free and open examination. We're not that concerned if you're inconvenienced. If it's embarrassing, then, so be it. So what are public records? The Open Records Act has an expansive definition for public records. All books, papers, maps, photographs, cards, tapes, discs, diskettes, recording, etc., which are prepared, owned, used in the possession of, or retained by a public agency. The definition of public records, it includes records that are exempt from inspection under the Open Records Act. So even if something's exempted under the Open Records Act, that doesn't mean it's not a public record. It also includes records maintained by an agent of the agency. Just because a record's not maintained on the agency's premises does not mean it is not a public record of the agency. There is a brand new case that came out that says emails and text messages that concern public business, which are stored on personal cell phones, email accounts, or computers, are public records. So government business being done through a personal email account is subject to open records. Jerry?
Let me turn my mic back on there. So then the personal email, the text message, would that be also governed under the record retentions?
Yeah, it would. Because if they're public records. So
Okay,
what this case
I thought that'd be the case, so I just wanted to, because I know several of members use either their business or personal emails, and so that would be something to consider with
Yes.
that's public record.
Yes, and it's easiest for people to just use the official email, and for text messages, not use personal phones. It doesn't, to be clear, it doesn't mean that if you get copied on an email that goes to your personal phone, the whole phone is suddenly a public record. There's another part of the act that talks about exempting clearly personal records from disclosure, and if a public record can be separated into exempt and non-exempt, the agency has the responsibility to do that, but we'll talk about that later. Who can request public records or request to inspect public records? The answer is any resident of the Commonwealth. A resident of the Commonwealth is somebody who lives in Kentucky. It's a domestic business in Kentucky. It's foreign businesses that are registered with the Secretary of State. People who work within Kentucky, people or businesses who own property in Kentucky, real property, agents of these people, or news gathering organizations generally newspapers, general interest magazines, TV stations, radio stations, websites. Pretty much the only thing that definition excludes are advertising circulars, essentially. There's kind of a complicated definition of, a publication that's has so many ads in it or whatnot, but it's fairly obvious what is a news gathering organization. All public records are open for inspection, and suitable facilities have to be made available by each public agency for the exercise of this right. So, how do people request a public record? Requests have to be made to the public agency's official custodian of records. So, official custodians defined in the statute as the chief admin officer or any other officer or employee of a public agency who's responsible for the maintenance, care, and keeping of public records, regardless of whether they are in his actual personal custody or control. The Attorney General says that you can designate a person to be the official custodian of records. If a person sends a request to somebody who does not have custody or control of the public record requested, that person must still notify the requester and give the name and location of the official custodian of the requested agency's records. So for here, that would be if somebody sent a letter asking for something for teachers' retirement. You can't take that and ignore it. The official custodian has to write back to that person and say, we don't have these records. Here's the person you need to talk to get the records. So the Attorney General has created a form, and it's called it says request to inspect public records at the top. That form, if somebody uses it, must be accepted. But just because somebody doesn't use the Attorney General's form, that doesn't mean that it's not a valid request. All they have to do to comply with the requirements of the Open Records Act is provide an application in writing, sign it either physically or electronically, have their legible printed name on it, and describe the records to be inspected. Agencies can require the person to also provide a statement, essentially proving they're a Kentucky resident, like an address or, do you work here? But that's all that's required to be a valid request. KPPA, I know, has the Attorney General's form on its website. I think the vast majority of people use the Attorney General's form, but it's important to know that just because you don't get a request on the Attorney General form doesn't mean that it's not valid. The applicant has to either hand deliver, mail, fax, or email it to the official custodian. Agencies cannot require people to use a particular form beyond these basic requirements of it being in writing, having a signature, describing the record, etc., for it to be a valid request. So the KPPA, CERS could not create its own bespoke form and require people to use it and refuse to answer open records requests if it wasn't used. All that's required is that people sign a writing describing the records. So how does an agency have to respond to an open records request? First, the agency has to determine whether it's going to comply with the request, and they've got 5 days to do it once they receive it, excluding weekends and legal holidays. The agency then has to notify the requester in writing of its decision. If the agency denies the request in whole or in part, it has to state the specific exception authorizing the denial and a brief explanation on how it applies to the record withheld. The written response must be issued by the official custodian or someone under his authority, and it constitutes final agency action. What methods can a person use to inspect public records? A person can inspect public records in two ways. It can either be done in person during regular office hours of the agency or by receiving copies through the mail. So if a public record's in active use, if it's in storage, if it's not available, the official custodian is required to immediately notify the requester, provide a place, time, and date for inspection of the records within 5 days of receipt of the application. If there's going to be a delay of more than 5 days, the custodian has to give a detailed explanation of why there's a delay beyond 5 days, and they have to set a place, time, and the earliest date on which the record will be available for inspection. The Attorney General's opinions are pretty aggressive in enforcing this. They are not generally happy with agencies that kick the can down the road with these type of records. They really do expect that it's going to be done within 5 days. Inspections of public records in person. So agencies have to provide suitable facilities for the inspection of public records. So suitable facilities does not only mean the physical location of the records, but it includes providing suitable equipment in which to access the records, such as a computer, film reader, tape player. That Attorney General opinion from 1990, the agency, I believe, handed the person like a microfiche container and refused to let that person use the microfiche reader. And the Attorney General's office said, well, you're denying them the ability to actually inspect the record. You didn't provide suitable facilities for it, because he obviously can't read that in the format you gave it to him. And this other one from 1993, back at the dawn of computers being able to read CDs, I think this person was given a CD of public records and was told that's what you get, and he didn't have a computer. The AG said that was unacceptable. That's a denial of his right to inspect public records. So in the present day, that would be, it could be a denial of a right to inspect if a person is provided records in an electronic format that's proprietary and requires an extremely expensive piece of software to view. The Attorney General really considers that the agency needs to allow that person to use equipment to view the public record in cases like that. It also means that you have to provide a space free from verbal abuse. That case or opinion from 93, somebody went to Richmond City Hall with their secretary, wanted to look at and copy records, and the city manager stood over his shoulder for 30 minutes and screamed at them and made his secretary cry, and so they left. And the Attorney General said, you can't do that. Obviously, that's not going to be a problem here, but it's an example of kind of the links they're going to go to interpret what suitable facilities means. Public agencies have to allow for physical inspection of public records on site during regular office hours. This is even if the agency would prefer to mail the records or provide them another way. And a person cannot be charged a fee as a condition to coming to the site to inspect records. They can be charged a fee for copying and some other things, but not just to come and inspect the records. Inspection of records by mail. Agencies may agree to answer any open records request by mail, but it cannot require people to accept records by mail. Core part of the act really is that people get to come to the agency and look at the records. A requester who lives and works in the same county where the public records are located may be required to come to the agency in person prior to receiving copies. An agency, though, is required to mail, if requested, records to a person who either lives or works outside the county in which the public records are located if the requester precisely describes the public records which are readily available within the agency and they have prepaid all fees and the cost of mailing. And this is a little different than coming to inspect in person. In person, you just have to describe the records generally you want to see. If you want them by mail, you need to precisely describe them. So precisely described has been interpreted to mean something described in definite, specific, and unequivocal terms. So if a requester cannot describe the documents they want to inspect with sufficient specificity, there's no requirement the agency conduct a search for such material. Open-ended, any and all records that relate type of requests, those are kind of lawyer requests generally. A request for any and all records which contain a name, a term, a phrase is not properly framed. Lyle?
Just a note, we're also not required to compile.
Mm-hmm.
Don't already exist.
Yes.
So
you
might want to touch on that a bit.
Yeah. So if it doesn't exist and there's a request that is essentially asking for a summary, the agency doesn't have to do that. So it's different for if you said, to think of an example, a precisely described request would be, I want payroll records for the month of May 2021 for this department. That's probably precisely described. Saying, I want to know the average pay of all positions within the agency, that's research. And the agency likely doesn't have to do it unless for some reason there is a summary of that already available. The other part of that is readily available. They're not readily available if they are widely dispersed or otherwise difficult to access. This really is just a recognition that public agencies and employees are servants of the people, but they are servants of all the people and not only of persons who make extreme and unreasonable demands on their time. So that goes back to the summary issue or creating records for people. That is not what the Open Records Act is for. It is for having access to already created agency records. Agent or records that are not precisely described are not readily available. Agencies are not required to perform research in order to comply with a request. If the person who wants them by mail does not particularly describe the records, the agency complies with the act by saying generally these records are available to inspect during normal office hours. if it can be ascertained what they're trying to request. When can an agency exempt a record? There's numerous exemptions. I think there's about 20, depending on how you count all these subparts. Like open meetings, they're strictly construed. The General Assembly has stated it does not care if there's inconvenience or embarrassment to public officials or others. That alone is not a sufficient justification. They recognize that there are certain things where, the utility to the public is so minimal compared to the embarrassment or inconvenience that they're exempt. But just exempting anything that has a hint of embarrassment or inconvenience that's contrary to public policy. Excluded public records are only examined when a court of competent jurisdiction orders that they can be. Courts cannot authorize the disclosure of records related to civil litigation beyond what be authorized by the discovery rules. This is for obvious reasons. They don't want attorneys clogging up the agencies with basically discovery requests. The court of competent jurisdiction is the circuit court in the county where the agency has its principal place of business or where the public record is located. Public records containing information of a personal nature where the public disclosure thereof would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. That's one exemption. The process the courts have used is to first determine if the record or information is of a personal nature, then balance the privacy interest of the person involved with the public's interest in disclosure. This turns on whether the public has little to no legitimate interest in a matter that would cause somebody very serious personal embarrassment or humiliation. Another exception is records confidentially disclosed to an agency or required by an agency to be disclosed to it. Generally recognized as confidential or proprietary, which if openly discussed would permit an unfair advantage to competitors of the entity that disclosed the records. This has been held to include investment strategies of private contracting firms. If I'm remembering this correctly, I think that open records decision concerns Kentucky retirement systems or the old Kentucky retirement systems. And another thing I'll note before moving on, just because a document is exempted under the Open Records Act does not mean that you can go into closed session and discuss that document under the Open Meetings Act. You have to have an exception that applies for both acts. So the record has to be accepted under the Open Records Act, and then you have to have a valid reason to go into closed session under the Open Meetings Act. Other exemptions are preliminary drafts, notes, correspondence with private individuals, other than final agency action notice, and preliminary recommendations, preliminary memoranda, in which opinions are expressed or policies formulated or recommended. This is intended to cover notes, memos, drafts. It covers inter-office emails for the most part. It covers chat messages. The idea is that members of agencies should be able to have frank discussions amongst themselves to determine agency policy. The important thing to remember, though, is once this becomes a final product, the final product is not exempt. But the preliminary materials like rough drafts are exempt. So Discussions which lead to policy, notes which lead to policy, will be exempt. The policy itself, obviously not going to be exempt. And this is examined essentially on a case-by-case basis. Another exemption is public records or information, the disclosure of which is prohibited by federal law or regulation or state law. CERS by state law is prevented from disclosing information that would compromise its ability to competitively invest in real estate or other asset classes. So when there's a record that relates to that, and if CERS can properly invoke that section of its statute, that those documents are exempt. Also exempt are public records or information, the disclosure of which is prohibited or restricted, otherwise made confidential by enactment of the General Assembly. Lyle?
I think that goes to the question I asked earlier. Obviously, documents are one thing, but if in a meeting we're discussing those documents, wouldn't they then be subject to being able to go into executive session for?
I would have to look at that statute again. That part of the statute, it's a fairly big paragraph. If that statute applied, yes. If it is, and the only reason I'm hesitating is I cannot remember right now whether that statute only exempts the document or if it intends to exempt discussion on it as well. But if it did intend to do that, it was clear enough from the statutory language, then yes, that would be appropriate to go into closed session to discuss it.
Okay, thank you.
Made confidential by enactment of the General Assembly. The major one is attorney-client privilege. The rules of evidence are where you get attorney-client privilege, and the rules of evidence are statutory in this state. So anything attorney-client privileged is exempt from open records under the Act. So when an agency exempts a public record, it has to examine the document and separate the accepted and non-accepted information and make the non-accepted information available for examination. So going back to the CERS statute, which I'll try and pull up while we talk. If that was a document, like a larger proposal, and it had a bunch of introductory material that really had nothing to do with competitiveness or wouldn't harm the ability of the system to invest, that needs to be separated out. And then the harmful part is what needs to be redacted. An agency can refuse unreasonably burdensome requests or repeated requests that the custodian believes are intended to disrupt other essential functions of the public agency. This is really meant for requests that say things like, I want all the criminal records from the police station for the past 25 years. And I'm coming down there to inspect them. That's something that's obviously on its face unreasonable. That would require a huge amount of manpower to get that ready for that person. They are going to have to be more specific. Also, repeated requests that are just meant to be protests against an agency trying to disrupt its function, or people who are just trying to tie up the manpower of an agency. That doesn't have to be complied with every single time. But if these exceptions are going to be invoked, the agency has to prove by clear and convincing evidence that it's justified in invoking them. So it has to be pretty clear. Clear and convincing as a standard is not 50%, which is preponderance of the evidence, which is, a hair greater than 50%. Clear and convincing is a higher burden than that. So it's not, the agency has more of a duty to, I'll say, indulge people than just saying, well, it's more likely than not that they're trying to mess with us, or that this is an unreasonably burdensome request. The agency has a higher they have a higher obligation than just saying it's more likely than not. They need to show exactly why they can't comply, or that it's burdensome, or that this person is just trying to disrupt the agency. I'll go through this pretty quickly. People have the right, if they're in person, to bring a notepad and write notes on records. People also have the right to make photocopies or obtain copies of all non-exempt public records, even non-written records, so like a tape recording. They have the right to sit there with a tape recorder, record what's on the original, so long as you don't alter or damage the original record. The custodian can require people to pay an advanced fee for copies and postage. They can charge different fees depending on if the records are being asked for commercial use or not. Commercial purpose is essentially making money off of the records, but it does not include newspapers publishing things, periodicals, or records that are used in preparation for prosecution, defense, or settlement of litigation. Agencies have to make available in standard formats records that are non-commercial. People can ask for records in either paper or electronic form. If the agency only maintains their records in paper, they do not have to convert it to electronic format. The person just has to be happy with the paper copies. If the agency does maintain the record in both formats or only in electronic format, that person can request it in electronic format. The cost recovered for copies cannot exceed the actual cost of reproduction, including the cost of the media, which would be papers, CDs, flash drives, whatever, and any mechanical processing cost incurred. An agency for non-commercial records that are standard cannot recover staff costs. But an agency, if they are asked to provide something in a non-standard or otherwise tailored form, may recover staff costs in addition to the actual costs incurred, which would just be if you had a bunch of paper records and somebody demanded them in electronic form, and the agency could say, we're gonna, if you want it like that, we can charge you for it, basically. Commercial use, there's a reasonable fee. That's what the cost that can be charged is based on, and it is based on, again, the cost of paper, flash drives, mechanical processing, but also the staff required to copy the record. And if the agency for some reason has to go get the record or create it, that cost can be passed on to the commercial requester as well. Agencies can also require them to enter into a contract concerning the use of the records and their fees. I imagine this was the case back when, back before these mugshot websites were banned. I'm sure that there were some contracts between agencies that held the mugshots and these websites where there are limitations on their use. Talk about how the agency was going to get paid for using that. Agencies can make electronic records available for access online. They can make you create an account to access the record, or otherwise kind of make you enter into a contract. They can only charge the cost of the physical connection to the system and the reasonable cost of computer access time. Agency rules and regulations. Agencies are required to adopt rules and regulations to provide full access to public records, to protect public records from damage and disorganization, to prevent excessive disruption to the agency's functions, and to provide assistance and information upon request, and to assure efficient and timely action in response to application for inspection. These are not regulations that come from, the administrative register. These are just rules that the agency itself adopts, like the principal office and regular office hours, the title, address, email address of the official custodian, what fees they're going to charge for copies, and then if there's any other procedure that needs to be followed in requesting public records, it has to be in there too. These have to be on the website. The website also has to have the official custodian and the contact information. And it also needs to have the Attorney General form, which is accepted by every agency in the state. There's also model rules that the Finance Cabinet has put out. They've promulgated that as an administrative regulation. They've said that that's a good starting point for an agency's rule, but it's not mandatory to use their rules. Administrative enforcement. A person may forward the written request and denial from an agency to the Attorney General. The Attorney General then has 20 days to produce an opinion. And a person does not only have the right to appeal a denial of an open records request. They can appeal actions that they feel are an attempt to subvert the intent of the act. So that would be excessive fees, excessive delays, statements that the agency just keeps needing more time, misdirection from the agency. That's all appealable. Once the Attorney General renders its decision, the parties have 30 days to appeal to the circuit court in the county the agency is located or where the records are maintained. If there's no appeal, the opinion becomes law and can be enforced in the appropriate circuit court. Alternatively, a person may immediately file suit in the circuit court of the county where the agency is located or the records are maintained. I could not find an Attorney General's opinion or a appeals court decision saying that you have to make your request first. I think you probably have to at least make the request. I don't see how you would have standing otherwise. But beyond that, the statute doesn't contemplate any other action from you. If you wanted to go directly to circuit court, you didn't want to involve the Attorney General's office opinion process at all, that's your right. You can file a lawsuit, you can ask for an injunction, whatever form of action is appropriate, you can go to the circuit court. The public agency bears the burden of proof. Essentially, the agency has to justify its denial. It's not the plaintiff's burden to prove that he or she should have gotten the record. It is the agency's burden to prove that the record's exempted, or otherwise it was appropriate not to provide it. Like Open Meetings Act, Open Records Act cases take priority over all other matters, have to be assigned a trial at the earliest possible date. Anybody who prevails against an agency where the violation was found to be willful may be awarded costs and reasonable attorney's fees. They can also award the person $25 per day they were denied the right to inspect or copy the record. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Any lingering questions? Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate all the information you provided for us and the time you put
No
in
problem.
putting this together. This concludes our agenda for today. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
Thank you, Jerry. Do we have a second? I'm sorry, the second was from?
Bill. Jerry.
Thank you, Bill. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. Everybody have a good evening. Go Cats.
Thank you all.